The elevator doors opened with a soft ding at exactly 11:47 p.m., and Richard stepped into the darkened hallway of his corporate building's top floor. His footsteps echoed against the marble as he walked toward his office, briefcase in hand, ready to grab some important documents he'd forgotten earlier. The cleaning crew should have finished hours ago, leaving the building empty except for security. But as he approached his corner office, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the sound of quiet sobbing mixed with desperate whispers. "Please don't cry, Lily. Mama said we have to be strong. But I'm so tired, Rose. My hands hurt from scrubbing." Richard froze outside his office door, his hand hovering over the handle. Those voices, they sounded like children. Young children. His heart began to race as he slowly pushed open the door, and what he saw inside made him question everything he thought he knew about his perfectly organized world. Two small girls, no older than 10, were on their hands and knees scrubbing his office floor. Their clothes were too big for their tiny frames, hanging loose like hand-me-downs. Their dark hair was pulled back in messy ponytails, and their small hands were red and raw from cleaning chemicals. One girl had tears streaming down her cheeks while the other tried to comfort her sister, both working frantically to clean the massive office space. "Who are you?" Richard's voice came out sharper than he intended, and both girls jumped up, fear filling their wide brown eyes. They clutched their cleaning rags like shields, backing away from him until they hit the wall. "Please don't fire Mama," the braver twin whispered, her voice shaking. "She's really sick, but she didn't want to lose her job. We know how to clean good, I promise. We won't make any mistakes." Richard's briefcase slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a loud thud. These children were here, alone at midnight, doing backbreaking labor that grown adults struggled with. "Where is your mother?" he asked, trying to soften his voice. "She has a fever," the other twin said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "She was throwing up all day, but she said Mr. Johnson would fire her if she didn't come to work. So we came instead. We've been watching her clean for months. We know what to do." The office suddenly felt too small, too warm. Richard loosened his tie as he stared at these two brave little girls who were willing to sacrifice their childhood to save their mother's job. "What are your names?" "I'm Rose," said the first twin, still protecting her sister. "This is Lily. We're 9 years old. Well, almost 10 next month." "And your mother's name?" "Sarah Chin," Rose answered. "She's been cleaning your building for 2 years. She always says you're a nice man because you leave thank you notes sometimes." Richard remembered those notes. He'd started leaving them after noticing how spotless his office always was, how carefully everything was arranged. He'd never met Sarah face to face, but he'd appreciated her work. Now he was meeting her children instead, and they were doing her job while she lay sick at home. "Girls, you shouldn't be here alone. It's not safe, and this isn't work for children." "But we need the money," Lily spoke up for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "The medicine costs so much and rent is due next week. Mama cries at night when she thinks we're sleeping. She doesn't know we hear her." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. He'd built his billion-dollar empire from nothing, working his way up from poverty, but he'd forgotten what it felt like to be desperate. Looking at these girls brought back memories of his own childhood, the nights without dinner, the fear of eviction, the way his mother had worked herself sick trying to provide for him. "How did you get into the building?" "Mama gave us her key card," Rose explained. "She trained us for weeks. We know which chemicals to use where, how to empty the trash, how to make everything perfect. We've been coming with her sometimes on weekends to learn." The weight of the situation hit Richard like a physical blow. A mother so desperate to keep her job that she trained her 9-year-old daughters to replace her. Children so devoted to their family that they'd sacrifice their sleep, their safety, their childhood to help. And here he was, living in luxury while his employees struggled to survive. "Have you eaten dinner?" Both girls shook their heads. "We'll eat when we get home," Rose said. "Mama left us soup." "It's almost midnight. When do you usually finish?" "Around 2 in the morning," Lily answered. "Then we take the bus home and sleep for a few hours before school." Richard's hands clenched into fists. These children were working a 6-hour shift, then going to school the next day. No wonder Lily had been crying. "Sit down," he said gently, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. "Both of you." They hesitated, clearly afraid they were in trouble. "We didn't break anything," Rose said quickly. "We were extra careful. You're not in trouble. I just want to talk." Richard walked to his mini fridge and pulled out 2 bottles of juice and some crackers he kept for long work nights. "Here, eat these while we talk." The girls accepted the food gratefully, their small hands shaking as they opened the crackers. Richard watched them eat with the hunger of children who didn't know where their next meal was coming from, and he made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Girls, I want you to call your mother." "She doesn't have a phone," Rose said sadly. "It got shut off last month." "Then we're going to go see her. Right now." "But the cleaning isn't finished," Lily protested. "We still have 6 more offices to do. The cleaning can wait. Your mother needs to know where you are and we need to make sure she's okay." Richard grabbed his coat from the back of his chair. "Come on. My car is downstairs." As they walked toward the elevator, Rose tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Are you going to fire Mama?" Richard looked down at her worried face and felt his heart break a little more. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to help her." But as the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Richard had no idea that this night would lead him not just to help a struggling family, but to find the love of his life and discover what really mattered in his world of wealth and power. The drive through the city's poorest neighborhood opened Richard's eyes to a world he'd forgotten existed. His luxury car felt out of place among the rundown buildings and broken streetlights. Rose and Lily sat quietly in the back seat, giving him directions in small voices while pressing their faces to the windows to look for familiar landmarks. "Turn left here," Rose said softly. "We live in the blue building. The one with the broken sign." Richard pulled up in front of a 3-story apartment complex that had seen better days decades ago. The paint was peeling, several windows were boarded up, and the front steps were cracked and uneven. But even in this rough neighborhood, he could see attempts at making things better: small flower pots on some windowsills, a community garden in the tiny front yard, children's chalk drawings on the sidewalk. "Apartment 2B, Lily whispered as they climbed the narrow stairs. The hallway smelled like cooking spices and cleaning supplies, with worn carpet that had been patched in several places. When Rose knocked softly on the door, they heard movement inside, then a weak voice. "Girls? Is that you? You're home early." "We brought someone with us, Mama," Rose called through the door. "Don't worry, he's nice." The door opened slowly and Richard found himself face to face with Sarah Chin for the first time. Even sick with fever, she was beautiful in a way that took his breath away. Her long black hair was damp with sweat, her dark eyes bright with illness, and she wore an old robe that she clutched tightly around herself. But what struck him most was the way she immediately moved to shield her daughters, even in her weakened state. "Who is this?" she asked, her voice hoarse but firm. "This is Mr. Richard, Mama," Lily said, slipping past her mother into the small apartment. "He found us cleaning his office." Sarah's face went pale and she swayed on her feet. Richard stepped forward instinctively to steady her, and she didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I know they shouldn't have been there. I'll pay for any damages. Please don't call the police." "Nobody's calling the police," Richard said gently, helping her back into the apartment. "You need to sit down. You're burning up with fever." The tiny apartment was spotlessly clean despite Sarah's illness. The furniture was old but well cared for, and everywhere Richard looked, he saw signs of a loving home: children's artwork on the refrigerator, library books stacked neatly on a small table, photos of the twins at various ages smiling despite their circumstances. "Girls, get your mother some water," Richard said, then turned to Sarah. "When did you last see a doctor?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I can't afford a doctor. This will pass. It's just a flu bug. You're training your 9-year-old daughters to do industrial cleaning at midnight because you can't afford to miss work sick. This is more serious than a flu bug." "You don't understand," Sarah said, accepting the water glass from Rose. "I've worked so hard to keep this job. If Mr. Johnson finds out I sent children to replace me, he'll fire me and probably call social services. The girls could be taken away." Richard sat down on the small couch beside her, noting how she tried to keep distance between them despite her weakness. "I'm not going to let that happen. But I need to understand your situation. How long have you been struggling like this?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching her daughters settle on the floor with some coloring books. "Their father left when they were 3, she finally said. "He couldn't handle having twins, said it was too much responsibility. I had a good job then, working as an office manager for a small company. But when they turned 6, Lily got really sick. She needed surgery and months of treatment." "What kind of surgery?" "Heart surgery. She was born with a defect that didn't show up until she was older. The medical bills." Sarah's voice broke. "I lost everything. The house, the car, the job when I took too much time off for her appointments. We've been living here for 2 years and I've been working 3 cleaning jobs to try to catch up on the debt." Richard felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. 3 jobs. Your building at night, an office complex in the morning, and a restaurant on weekends. The girls stay with Mrs. Rodriguez next door when I'm working, but she's elderly and can't always watch them. When they started asking to come with me sometimes, I thought it would be good for them to learn responsibility. You train them to be backup workers. I train them to survive, Sarah said fiercely, then coughed hard enough to make her whole body shake. In our world, Mr. Richard, children grow up fast or they don't grow up at all. Rose looked up from her coloring book. Mama, you should show him Lily's pictures. She draws the best hearts. I draw hearts because I had heart surgery, Lily explained to Richard seriously. The doctor said my heart was broken but they fixed it. Now it works perfectly. Richard knelt down beside Lily and looked at her artwork. The page was covered in colorful hearts, each one unique and beautiful. These are amazing, Lily. You're a real artist. Mama says art doesn't pay bills, but I still like to draw. Art can absolutely pay bills, Richard said, glancing at Sarah. Some of the most successful people I know are artists. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Richard, I appreciate you bringing the girls home, but I need to ask, are you going to report this? I know what they did was wrong, but I was desperate. I've never missed a day of work in 2 years. What I'm going to do, Richard said, standing up and pulling out his phone, is call my personal doctor and have him come check on you tonight. Then we're going to talk about making sure you and the girls have what you need. I can't afford a house call from a private doctor. You're not paying for it. I am. Sarah tried to stand up, swaying with fever and determination. I don't take charity. I work for everything my family has. This isn't charity. This is humanity. Richard looked around the small apartment again, seeing it through new eyes. You've been taking care of my building for 2 years. You've worked while sick, trained your children to help you, and never asked for anything extra. If anyone deserves help, it's you. Why? Sarah whispered. Why do you care? You don't even know us. Richard was quiet for a moment, remembering his own childhood, his own mother's struggles. Because 25 years ago I was one of those kids. My mother worked herself sick trying to provide for me and no one helped us. I swore that if I ever had the power to help families like ours, I would. The twins looked up from their coloring, sensing the importance of the moment. Sarah studied Richard's face, searching for deception or pity, but finding only sincere concern. If you help us, she said slowly, it has to be something I can pay back. I won't be in debt to anyone, not even a kind billionaire. Richard smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in months. I think we can work something out. As he called his doctor and arranged for the house call, Richard realized that finding Sarah and her daughters wasn't just about helping them. They were helping him remember who he used to be, and who he wanted to become again. Dr. Martinez arrived within an hour, a kind man in his 50s who had been Richard's personal physician for years. He examined Sarah thoroughly while the twins waited anxiously in the living room with Richard, who found himself more nervous than he'd been during any business deal. She has pneumonia, Dr. Martinez announced after finishing his examination. Not severe yet, but she needs antibiotics and at least a week of rest. Working in her condition could have been dangerous. I told you I was fine, Sarah called weakly from the bedroom. You told me you had the flu, the doctor replied with a gentle smile. There's a difference. I'm prescribing antibiotics and a strong cough medicine. She needs to stay hydrated and sleep as much as possible. Richard walked with the doctor to the hallway outside the apartment. What would have happened if she kept working? Pneumonia can become life-threatening if untreated, especially when someone is run down from overwork and stress. She's lucky you found her daughters tonight. After the doctor left, Richard returned to find Sarah trying to get dressed for work. Absolutely not, he said firmly, blocking her path to the door. I have 2 more buildings to clean tonight, and I'm scheduled at the restaurant tomorrow morning. You're scheduled to rest for a week. I'll handle your work obligations. Sarah stared at him like he'd lost his mind. You're going to clean buildings and wash dishes? I'm going to make sure your supervisors understand you're sick and need time off without losing your jobs. And the money I'll lose? The rent that's due? The medicine Dr. Martinez prescribed. Sarah's voice got stronger as she got more upset. You can't just wave your hand and make our problems disappear. Richard sat down in the chair across from her bed, choosing his words carefully. Sarah, I want to offer you a different job. A better job. Doing what? I need someone to manage the household staff at my estate. It's a full-time position with health insurance, paid vacation, and a salary that's triple what you make now. Sarah was quiet for so long that Richard thought she might have fallen asleep. Finally she spoke. What's the catch? No catch. You'd oversee the cleaning staff, manage schedules, handle supply orders. It's administrative work, not physical labor. And my daughters? There's a good school district near my estate. They could transfer after the holidays. Rose and Lily had been listening from the doorway, and now they crept into the room. Mama, Rose whispered, does this mean we wouldn't have to clean buildings anymore? And you wouldn't be sick all the time? Lily added. Sarah looked at her daughters, then back at Richard. Why are you doing this? Really? Richard was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. When I built my company, I told myself I was creating jobs, helping the economy. But I realize now that I've been so focused on profits that I forgot about the people doing the work. You and your daughters reminded me that behind every job is a family, and families deserve to feel secure. This is too much. Too generous. Sarah, in the past year, my company made enough profit that your new salary for the next 10 years would be like me dropping a quarter in a charity box. For you, it's life-changing. For me, it's nothing. Except. He paused, surprised by his own honesty. Except helping you feels like the most important thing I've done in years. The twins climbed onto the bed on either side of their mother. Can we think about it, Mama? Rose asked. Of course, sweetheart. Sarah smoothed Rose's hair, then looked at Richard. This is a big decision. I need time to consider it. Take all the time you need. But I want you to promise me something: you won't go back to work until you're completely well. I can't promise that. I have responsibilities. Then let me help with those responsibilities. Let me pay your rent this month and cover the medicine. Consider it an advance on your salary if it makes you feel better. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand why you're being so kind to us. Richard looked at the three of them together on the small bed, Sarah pale but determined, Rose protective and mature beyond her years, and Lily still clutching one of her heart drawings. Something shifted in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was young and still believed in things like love and family. Maybe because you're the first real people I've met in a long time, he said honestly. Over the next few days, Richard found himself thinking about Sarah and the twins constantly. He rearranged his schedule to check on them, bringing groceries and homework help for the girls. He discovered that Rose loved to read and had been working her way through the library's entire children's section. Lily showed him more of her artwork and taught him how to draw hearts the right way. And Sarah was unlike any woman he'd ever known. She was proud without being stubborn, grateful without being servile, and beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with expensive clothes or makeup. When she smiled at her daughters, Richard felt something melt inside him that he'd thought was permanently frozen. I've made my decision, Sarah announced on Friday evening as Richard brought dinner for the family. And? I'll take the job, but with conditions. Richard set down the bags of food, trying not to show how relieved he felt. Name them. First, I want a contract that clearly outlines my duties and salary. Second, I want to start with a 6-month trial period. If it doesn't work out, you help me find another job. Third, the girls and I keep this apartment for the first 3 months in case we need to come back. Agreed to all of that. Any other conditions? Sarah hesitated, then looked directly at him. I want to make sure this is really about the job, Richard. Not about anything else. Richard felt heat rise in his cheeks. Sarah, I know you're a good man. I can see it in how you treat my daughters. But I need to know that my job security doesn't depend on anything other than my work performance. I promise you this is about giving you and the girls a better life. Nothing more. But even as he said it, Richard knew it wasn't entirely true. Somewhere in the past week, helping Sarah's family had become about more than charity or even justice. It had become about the way Rose trusted him enough to show him her secret hiding place for library books. It had become about Lily asking him to help her with math homework because you're good at numbers. And it had become about the way Sarah looked at him sometimes, like she was seeing the man he used to be before money and power changed him. As he drove home that night to his empty mansion, Richard realized that in trying to save Sarah's family, they might just be saving him too. Moving day arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in November. Richard had arranged for professional movers to pack Sarah's apartment, but she insisted on doing most of it herself. He found her in the kitchen, carefully wrapping dishes in newspaper, her movements precise and economical. You don't have to pack everything, Richard said, watching her work. I can arrange for new dishes, furniture, whatever you need. These belong to my grandmother, Sarah replied, holding up a chipped teacup. I'm not leaving them behind. Richard understood. He'd grown up poor enough to know that when you don't have much, everything you do have carries extra meaning. Of course. I'm sorry. The twins were in their bedroom, carefully packing their few belongings. Richard could hear them discussing which stuffed animals were most important and which books they absolutely couldn't leave behind. Their whole lives fit into 4 cardboard boxes. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked Sarah as she continued packing. "Terrified," she admitted. "I've never lived anywhere but the city. I've never worked in anyone's home. What if I make mistakes? What if the girls don't fit in at their new school? They're going to love the school. It has art programs for Lily and an amazing library for Rose. And you're not going to make mistakes because you're the most capable person I know." Sarah paused in her wrapping. "How can you say that? You barely know me. I know you raised 2 incredible daughters while working 3 jobs and dealing with crushing medical debt. I know you trained those daughters to help you work at midnight while still making sure they kept up with school. I know you've been taking care of other people's buildings better than most people take care of their own homes." Richard moved closer, watching her hands as she worked. "I know enough." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, tears in her elderly eyes. "I'm going to miss you girls so much," she said, pulling Rose and Lily into hugs as they emerged from their room with their packed boxes. "We'll visit, Mrs. Rodriguez," Rose promised. "And we'll write you letters." "Mama said you taught her how to make the best soup," Lily added. "Can you teach us too so we can make it in our new house?" "Of course, Mija. And you remember, if you ever need anything, you call your old neighbor, okay?" Richard watched the emotional goodbye and realized how much Sarah and the girls were giving up. This wasn't just a move for them, it was leaving behind their entire support system, their whole world. "Sarah," he said quietly as the movers finished loading the truck, "are you sure about this? We can make other arrangements if you want to stay in the city." Sarah looked around the small apartment one last time, then at her daughters, saying goodbye to the only home they remembered. "No," she said firmly. "This is our chance for a better life. I'm not going to let fear stop us from taking it." The drive to Richard's estate took 45 minutes through increasingly beautiful neighborhoods. The twins pressed their faces to the car windows, marveling at the large houses and manicured lawns. When they finally reached Richard's property, even Sarah gasped. The estate sat on 20 acres of rolling hills, with a main house that looked like something from a movie. Gardens stretched in every direction, with walking paths and a small pond that reflected the autumn trees. The staff housing where Sarah and the girls would live was a comfortable cottage about a quarter-mile from the main house, with 3 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and a view of the gardens. "This is where we're going to live?" Lily whispered, staring at the cottage. "This is bigger than our whole apartment building," Rose said in amazement. Sarah stood in the cottage's living room, looking overwhelmed. "Richard, this is too much. The girls and I could live in one room. We don't need all this space." "Yes, you do," Richard said firmly. "Rose needs room for all those library books, and Lily needs space to create her art. And you need a home where you can rest and not worry about thin walls or noisy neighbors." Over the next few hours, Richard helped them settle in, showing Sarah around the main house and introducing her to the small staff. There was Helen, the part-time cook who came 3 days a week, James, the gardener who maintained the grounds, and Patricia, who handled general housekeeping twice a week. "So my job is coordinating all of this?" Sarah asked as they walked through the main house. "Coordinating, scheduling, handling supply orders, managing the budget for household expenses. Think of it as running a small business, except the business is making sure everything runs smoothly." Sarah stopped in the main house's library, a room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and comfortable reading chairs by tall windows. "Rose is going to lose her mind when she sees this. She's welcome to use it anytime. Both girls are. I want them to feel at home here." That evening, Richard joined Sarah and the twins for dinner in their cottage. Lily had already found art supplies in her new room, a gift from Richard, and was drawing pictures of their new home. Rose had discovered the library and was practically vibrating with excitement about all the books she could read. "Mr. Richard," Rose said as they ate Helen's delicious lasagna, "why is your house so big if you live there all by yourself?" "Rose," Sarah warned, "that's not polite to ask." "It's okay," Richard said. "It's a good question. I bought this house because I thought it would make me feel successful. But you're right, it's too big for one person. It's been pretty lonely, actually." "You could get a dog," Lily suggested seriously. "Dogs are good company. Or you could get married and have kids," Rose added. "Then you'd have a family to fill up all those rooms." Sarah's cheeks turned pink. "Girls, eat your dinner." But Richard found himself thinking about Rose's innocent suggestion. He'd always been too focused on work for serious relationships. The women he'd dated had been more interested in his money than in him. But sitting in this cozy cottage, sharing a simple meal with Sarah and her daughters, He felt more content than he had in years. "What about you, Sarah?" he asked. "Do you think you'll like living here?" Sarah looked around the cottage, then at her daughters happily eating and chattering about their new rooms. "I think we're going to like it very much," she said softly. "Thank you, Richard, for all of this." Their eyes met across the table and Richard felt something shift between them. It wasn't just gratitude in Sarah's gaze and it wasn't just kindness in his. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that scared and excited him in equal measure. As he walked back to his empty mansion that night, Richard realized that bringing Sarah and the twins to his estate hadn't just changed their lives. It had changed his too in ways he was only beginning to understand. The first month at the estate passed quickly as everyone settled into new routines. Sarah proved to be exactly what Richard had hoped: organized, efficient, and capable of managing the household staff with the perfect balance of kindness and authority. The twins thrived in their new school, with Rose joining the advanced reading program and Lily discovering that her new art teacher wanted to enter her drawings in a children's competition. But it was the small, daily interactions that began to weave Richard's life together with theirs in unexpected ways. "Mr. Richard, you're eating cereal for breakfast again," Lily announced one morning, appearing in his kitchen with her school backpack and a disapproving expression. "It's efficient," Richard replied, holding up his bowl of cornflakes. "Mama says breakfast is the most important meal of the day. She made extra eggs. You should come eat with us." This became a pattern. Richard would start his day with coffee and whatever processed food he could grab quickly, and one of the twins would appear to drag him to their cottage for a real breakfast. Sarah would protest that he didn't need to bother, but her eyes would light up when he sat down at their small kitchen table. "You don't have to feed me every morning," Richard told Sarah one day as she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him. "The girls like having you here," Sarah replied. "And honestly, so do I. It's nice to cook for someone who appreciates it. Your cooking is incredible. Where did you learn?" "My grandmother taught me. She said cooking was about more than just food, it was about taking care of people you love." The word love hung in the air between them, making both of them suddenly aware of how domestic their morning routine had become. Richard cleared his throat and asked Rose about her latest library book, while Sarah busied herself packing the girls' lunches. Evenings became another shared time. Richard started stopping by the cottage after work, initially to check on how Sarah was adjusting to her new job, but soon because he genuinely enjoyed their company. He helped Rose with her homework, listened to Lily's stories about art class, and found himself staying later and later each night. "You don't have to entertain us every evening," Sarah said one night after the girls had gone to bed. They were sitting on her small front porch, watching the sunset over the gardens. "I'm not entertaining you. You're entertaining me. My house feels like a museum after spending time here. It's a beautiful house. It's a beautiful empty house. There's a difference." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Don't you ever want to fill it? With a family of your own?" Richard considered the question seriously. "I thought I did when I was younger. But building the company took everything I had. By the time I was successful enough to think about settling down, I realized I didn't know how to connect with people anymore. Everyone who showed interest seemed more interested in my bank account than in me. That must be lonely." It was. Until now. Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Richard saw something in Sarah's expression that made his heart race. But before either of them could speak, Rose's voice called from inside. "Mama, I can't find my library book." The moment passed, but the feeling lingered. Richard's business associates began to notice changes in him. He left the office earlier, spent more time working from home, and seemed more relaxed during meetings. "You're different lately," his business partner Tom observed during lunch at their usual expensive restaurant. "More human." "Thanks, I think." "I'm serious. You're smiling more, you're not working 18-hour days, and you actually asked me about my kids last week. What's going on?" Richard hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I hired a new household manager. She has twin daughters. Spending time with them has reminded me that there's more to life than quarterly reports." "Ah," Tom said with a knowing grin. "She's pretty, isn't she?" "It's not like that. She's an employee." "Right. And I'm sure the fact that you're glowing when you talk about her has nothing to do with it." Richard wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. The truth was he was falling for Sarah Chin, and it terrified him. That weekend, Lily came down with a mild fever, nothing serious, but enough to worry Sarah. Richard found her in Lily's room at midnight, sitting beside the bed and monitoring her daughter's temperature. "She's fine," Sarah said quietly when she noticed him in the doorway. "Just a little bug. But I can't help worrying." After what happened with her heart surgery, I can understand that. Richard sat in the chair across from the bed, keeping his voice low so they wouldn't wake Lily. Tell me about that time. What was it like? Sarah was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she spoke. It was the worst time of my life. Lily was so small and she didn't understand why she couldn't play like other kids. The doctor said we caught it just in time, but the surgery was risky. I spent 3 days in the hospital waiting room, praying to anyone who would listen. You were alone? Completely alone. Her father had already left, my parents died when I was young and I didn't have close friends. It was just me and Rose, who was only 6 and scared out of her mind that her sister might die. Richard felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of Sarah facing that crisis alone. What about the medical bills? Crushing. Even with insurance, the costs were enormous. That's when I started falling behind on everything else. I chose to save my daughter's life and I'd make that choice again, but it destroyed our financial stability. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily sleep peacefully. Richard found himself imagining what it would have been like to be there with Sarah during that terrifying time, to hold her hand in the waiting room, to help carry the burden of worry and fear. Sarah, he said softly, I want you to know that you'll never have to face anything like that alone again. If either of the girls ever needs medical care, or if you need anything at all, I'm here. Richard, you can't promise things like that. You're my employer, not your what? Sarah looked at him across Lily's sleeping form, and in the dim light of the nightstand lamp, Richard saw the same longing in her eyes that he felt in his heart. Not my family, she finished quietly. What if I wanted to be? The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Before Sarah could answer, Lily stirred in her sleep and the moment passed. But something had changed between them, something that couldn't be taken back. The next morning Lily's fever broke, and she was back to her usual energetic self. At breakfast, she announced that she wanted to show Richard her latest drawing. It's a picture of our family, she said proudly, holding up a colorful drawing of 4 stick figures standing in front of a house. That's me and Rose and Mama, she explained, pointing to 3 figures. And that's you because you eat breakfast with us every day, so you're part of our family now. Richard's throat tightened as he looked at the drawing. In Lily's innocent eyes, he wasn't just their employer or their benefactor. He was family. Can I keep this? He asked. Of course. Mama, can we put it on the refrigerator too? Sarah nodded, but Richard caught the way she looked at him with warmth, affection, and something that looked a lot like love. That afternoon, while the girls were at school, Richard found Sarah in the main house's study, working on household accounts. She looked up when he entered, and the air between them felt charged with unspoken feelings. Sarah, about last night? Richard, please. Let's not make this complicated. It's already complicated. I can't stop thinking about you, about the girls, about how different my life feels now that you're in it. Sarah stood up, moving away from the desk. You're my employer. I depend on you for my job, for our home, for my daughter's security. I can't afford to blur those lines. What if the lines are already blurred? What if what's happening between us is real? What if it's not? What if you get tired of playing house with the poor single mother and her kids? What happens to us then? Richard stepped closer, seeing the fear in her eyes. Sarah, I would never hurt you or the girls. You have to know that. I know you believe that now. But you live in a different world than we do. You have options, freedom, power. We don't. Then let me share that world with you. Let me give you options and freedom too. Sarah shook her head. I won't be a kept woman, Richard. I won't have my daughters grow up thinking that's how relationships work. That's not what I'm offering. Then what are you offering? Richard looked into her eyes and realized he was about to say something that would change everything. I'm offering you my heart, Sarah. All of it. Forever. The study fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Sarah stared at Richard, her eyes wide with shock and something that might have been hope. Richard, you can't just say things like that. Why not if they're true? Because. Sarah's voice broke. Because I'm falling in love with you too, and it scares me to death. Richard crossed the room in 3 steps and took her hands in his. Then let's be scared together. Let's see where this leads. And if it doesn't work out? Then we'll face that too. But Sarah, I'd rather risk everything for a chance at real happiness than spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. The girls love me already and I love them. They drew me into their family picture, remember? This is crazy. The best things usually are. Sarah was quiet for a long moment and Richard held his breath. Finally she squeezed his hands. If we do this, we take it slow. We don't tell the girls anything until we're sure. And if it doesn't work, it will work, Richard said confidently. How can you be so sure? Richard smiled and pulled her closer. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not thinking about profit margins or stock prices or quarterly reports. I'm thinking about breakfast with your daughters and bedtime stories, and growing old with someone who sees the man I really am, not just the money I've made. And who is the man you really are? I'm still figuring that out. But I know he's someone better when he's with you. When Sarah smiled, Richard felt like he'd won the lottery, closed the biggest deal of his career, and conquered the world all at once. And when she let him kiss her, soft and sweet in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the study windows, he knew he was home. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Richard was working late in his home office when he heard a soft knock on the door. Sarah entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, looking nervous in a way he hadn't seen since their first night together. The girls are asleep, she said, setting 1 cup on his desk. Can we talk? Of course. Richard saved his work and gave her his full attention. What's on your mind? Sarah sat down across from him, holding her coffee cup like a shield. I need to tell you something about my past. About who I was before I became a struggling single mother. Sarah, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because if we're going to have a real relationship, you need to know the whole truth. Richard waited, sensing this was important. My maiden name was Sarah Williams. I grew up in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. Richard's eyebrows rose. That was one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. My father was a successful investment banker. My mother came from old money. I went to private schools, spent summers in the Hamptons, had a trust fund that would have set me up for life. What happened? Sarah set down her coffee and looked directly at him. I fell in love with the wrong man. Tony Chin was everything my parents hated: working class, no college degree, ambitious but in ways they didn't understand. He was trying to start his own construction company, working 18-hour days to build something from nothing. How did you meet? He was renovating the kitchen in my parents' townhouse. I was home from college for the summer, and I was fascinated by someone who worked with his hands, who was building something real instead of just moving money around on paper. Richard could picture a younger Sarah, privileged and sheltered, falling for a hard-working man who represented everything her world wasn't. My parents were furious when they found out we were dating. They threatened to cut me off, to disown me. They said Tony was only interested in my money. But you married him anyway. I did. And my parents kept their promise. They cut me off completely: no trust fund, no inheritance, no contact. They said if I wanted to live like common people, I could survive like common people. Sarah's voice was steady, but Richard could see the pain in her eyes even after all these years. Were you happy? In the beginning? Very happy. Tony's business started to succeed and I got pregnant with the twins. We bought a small house in Queens and I thought we were building the perfect life. I had everything I wanted: a husband who loved me, babies on the way, and the satisfaction of knowing we were making it on our own. When did things change? When the girls were born, Tony realized how expensive children could be. Then when they were 3, his business hit some tough times. He started working longer hours, getting more stressed, drinking more. And he began to resent me. Why? Because I couldn't help financially the way a different wife might have. I'd been raised to be decorative, not practical. I didn't have job skills or work experience. When Tony needed a partner who could contribute income, I was useless. Richard wanted to interrupt, to tell her she wasn't useless, but he could see she needed to finish her story. The final straw was Lily's heart condition. When we found out she needed surgery, Tony looked at the medical bills and said he couldn't handle it. He said he'd married me thinking I came with money, and instead I'd cost him everything. He left you to deal with your daughter's surgery alone. He packed a bag that night and said he was going to find work in another state. He'd send money when he could, but he couldn't watch his daughter suffer through something he couldn't fix. Sarah's voice finally broke. He never sent money. We never heard from him again. Richard felt rage building in his chest. Sarah, I'm so sorry. The worst part was that he wasn't entirely wrong. I had been sheltered and impractical. I didn't know how to support my family when they needed me, so I learned. I took any job I could find, learned to budget and sacrifice and fight for every dollar. I became the woman I needed to be. You became incredible. Sarah looked surprised. I became desperate. You became strong, resourceful, and devoted. You saved your daughter's life and raised 2 amazing children under impossible circumstances. That's not desperation, that's heroism. They sat in silence for a moment, and Richard processed everything she'd told him. Sarah, Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret it? Giving up your privileged life for love. Sarah considered the question seriously. I regret trusting someone who wasn't worthy of that trust. I regret not being better prepared to take care of myself and my children. But do I regret choosing love over money? Never. Even after everything you've been through? Especially after everything I've been through. Money doesn't love you back, Richard. It doesn't hold you when you're scared or laugh at your jokes, or draw you pictures to put on the refrigerator. Richard stood up and moved around the desk to sit beside her. Is that why you were so afraid of getting involved with me? Because I'm wealthy. Partly. I was afraid you'd think I was after your money like Tony thought I was after his. And I was afraid that if you lost interest, I'd lose everything again: my job, our home, my daughter's security. Sarah, look at me. Richard took her hands in his. I don't care about your past or your parents' money or anything except who you are right now. You're not dependent on me for anything. You're here because you choose to be, working a job you earned with your own skills and dedication. But if we're together, it's because we love each other. Everything else, the job, the house, the financial security, that stays the same no matter what happens between us personally. I would never use your livelihood as leverage in a relationship. Sarah studied his face, searching for sincerity. You promise? I promise. And Sarah? Your parents were fools to lose you over their pride. Their loss became my gain. Don't romanticize it too much. I made mistakes too. I was naive and unprepared for real life. You were young and in love. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stayed in my parents' world. If I'd married someone they approved of, someone with money and connections. Would you have been happy? Sarah thought about it. Comfortable, maybe. Safe, definitely. But not happy. Not the way I am when you help Rose with her homework, or when Lily shows you her drawings, or when we all have breakfast together in the morning. That's all I want to make you happy. You and the girls. Richard, there's something else I need to tell you. What? Sarah hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed him a news article she'd bookmarked. I know who you were before you became successful. Richard looked at the screen and saw an old newspaper clipping a story about scholarship recipients at the local university. There, among the photos of smiling students, was his own face from 25 years ago. You researched me? After you told me you grew up poor, I got curious. I found this article about you receiving a full scholarship for academic excellence despite coming from a low-income family. Sarah paused. Richard, we went to the same university. We were there at the same time. Richard stared at the article, memories flooding back. I remember you, he said suddenly. What? Not clearly, but there was a girl in my economics class. Beautiful, always perfectly dressed, usually sat in the front row. She asked thoughtful questions and seemed to actually care about learning, not just getting grades. That was me. And I remember you too, the serious boy who always sat in the back, who never spoke unless the professor called on you directly, but who clearly understood the material better than anyone else in the room. Why didn't you ever say anything? When we first met, I mean. Because you were this powerful billionaire and I was your cleaning lady. I figured you wouldn't remember, and even if you did, I wasn't the same person you might have known in college. Richard set down the phone and pulled Sarah closer. You're exactly the same person, kind, intelligent, beautiful. You just got stronger. Do you think it's strange? That we knew each other before and now we're here. I think it's perfect. Maybe we were supposed to find each other again. Maybe we were, Sarah agreed softly. That night, as Richard walked back to his empty mansion, he realized that learning about Sarah's past hadn't changed how he felt about her. It had only made him love her more. She had given up everything for love once and lost. This time he was determined to make sure she won. December brought the first snow to the estate, and with it, a warmth inside the cottage that had nothing to do with the fireplace. Richard had become part of the family's daily routine in ways that felt natural and right. He helped Rose practice for her school's spelling bee, attended Lily's art show at school, and spent his evenings on Sarah's couch, watching movies and talking about everything and nothing. You know, Sarah said one evening as they sat together after the girls had gone to bed, I never expected this. This feeling of contentment. Like everything is exactly as it should be. Richard pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her shampoo. I know what you mean. I used to think happiness was about achieving goals, making more money, closing bigger deals, gaining more power. But this is different. Different how? This feels like coming home every day instead of just coming back to a house. Sarah tilted her head to look at him. The girls have been asking questions. What kind of questions? Rose asked me yesterday if you were going to be her stepdad. Lily asked if that meant you'd live with us all the time instead of just visiting. Richard's heart raced. What did you tell them? I told them that grown-ups sometimes need time to figure things out, but that no matter what happens you'll always be important to our family. And what do you want to tell them? Sarah was quiet for a moment. I want to tell them that I hope so. That I hope you'll want to be part of our family officially, not just someone who visits. Sarah, I want nothing more than to marry you and legally become the girl's stepfather. I want to wake up in the same house as you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. But, Richard sighed. But I'm scared of moving too fast. You've been hurt before by someone who made promises he couldn't keep. I don't want you to think I'm rushing you into something you're not ready for. What if I told you I was ready? What if I told you that I've never felt more sure of anything in my life? Richard turned to face her fully. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I love you, Richard. Not your money, not your house, not the security you provide. I love the man who gets up early to make pancakes with my daughters. I love the way you listen when Rose reads her stories out loud, and the way you frame every piece of art Lily makes. I love how patient you are, how kind you are, how you make me feel beautiful and smart and worth loving. Sarah. I'm not finished. I love that you remember how it feels to struggle, that you haven't forgotten where you came from. I love that you want to help people, not just make money. And I love that you love my daughters like they're your own. Richard felt tears gathering in his eyes. They are my own in every way that matters. Then ask me. Ask you what? Ask me the question I can see in your eyes every time you look at me. Richard stood up, pulling Sarah to her feet with him. He looked into her eyes, seeing his whole future there. Sarah Chin, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and the girl's father? Will you build a real family with me? Yes, Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Yes to all of it. When Richard kissed her, it felt like every dream he'd never dared to have was coming true. The next morning at breakfast, the twins immediately noticed something different. Rose and Lily exchanged glances across the table, communicating in that wordless way twins often do. You both look happy, Rose observed, studying their faces carefully. We have something to tell you girls, Sarah said, reaching for Richard's hand. Are you getting married? Lily asked excitedly. Sarah and Richard looked at each other in surprise. How did you know? Because Richard keeps looking at you like Prince Eric looks at Ariel in The Little Mermaid, Lily explained seriously. And you keep smiling the way you do when we bring you flowers. And because you're holding hands differently, Rose added. Like you're not going to let go. So yes, Richard said, grinning at their perceptiveness, we're getting married. If that's okay with you. Both girls erupted in cheers and ran around the table to hug them. Does this mean you'll live with us all the time now? Lily asked, bouncing on her toes. It means we'll all live together as a real family, Sarah confirmed. Can we call you Dad? Rose asked Richard shyly. Richard's throat tightened with emotion. I would be honored if you called me Dad. Can we have a wedding party? Lily wanted to know. Can we invite Mrs. Rodriguez? Rose added. Can we get a dog now that we're a real family? Lily continued. One thing at a time, Sarah laughed, but Richard was already making mental notes. Mrs. Rodriguez would definitely be invited, and maybe it was time to visit the animal shelter. That afternoon, while the girls were at school, Richard and Sarah walked through his mansion, discussing their future living arrangements. I want to make this house feel like a home, Richard said as they stood in the grand foyer. What would you change? Everything, Sarah said immediately, then blushed. I'm sorry that sounded harsh. No, tell me. I want to know. Sarah looked around the elegant but cold space. It's beautiful, but it doesn't feel like a place where children live. Where a family laughs and makes messes and just exists. So we make it into that kind of place. We child-proof it, warm it up, fill it with the sounds of family life. You'd really want that? All the noise and chaos that comes with kids. Sarah, I've spent years in this beautiful, quiet, empty house. I can't wait for it to be full of noise and chaos and life. They spent the next few hours walking through each room, with Sarah suggesting changes that would make the space more family-friendly. A reading nook in the library for Rose, an art studio in the sunny room upstairs for Lily, a family room with comfortable furniture where they could watch movies together. This is going to be expensive, Sarah pointed out as their list grew longer. This is going to be perfect, Richard corrected. Sarah, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Let me spend some of it making our family happy. Our family, Sarah repeated, smiling. I like the sound of that. That evening, as they told the girls about the plans for renovating the mansion, Richard realized that his definition of wealth had completely changed. 6 months ago, he'd measured his worth in stock prices and profit margins. Now he measured it in bedtime stories and breakfast conversations, in art projects on the refrigerator and library books scattered on coffee tables. You know what the best part of all this is? Sarah asked as they sat on her cottage porch, watching the girls play in the garden. What? We get to do it right this time. Both of us. You get to have the family you always wanted, and I get to build a life with someone who truly loves me and my children. Our children, Richard corrected gently. Our children, Sarah agreed, and the word "our" had never sounded so beautiful. Richard should have known that happiness like theirs wouldn't go unnoticed or unchallenged. The first sign of trouble came during a board meeting in January, when his business partner Tom pulled him aside afterward. "Richard, we need to talk," Tom said, his expression serious. "What's wrong?" "There are rumors circulating about your personal life. People are saying you're involved with your domestic staff." Richard felt his jaw tighten. "My personal life is none of the board's business. It is when it affects the company's reputation. You're the face of this corporation, Richard. Your image matters to our investors." "What exactly are people saying?" Tom looked uncomfortable. "That you're having an inappropriate relationship with your housekeeper. That you're setting her up in luxury while she services you. That's disgusting. Sarah is not my housekeeper, she's my household manager. And our relationship is completely appropriate. We're engaged to be married." "Married?" Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Richard, you can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Think about what you're doing. This woman was cleaning buildings 6 months ago. She has 2 children, no education, no social standing. What will people think?" "I don't care what people think." "Well, you should. Margaret Whitman has been asking questions about your domestic situation. She's concerned about the company's image." Margaret Whitman was the chairwoman of their board of directors, a formidable woman in her 70s who controlled a significant portion of their stock. If she was asking questions, it meant serious trouble. "What kind of questions?" "She wants to meet with you. Today. 2 o'clock. Richard spent the next hour pacing his office, fury building with each step. He'd worked for 15 years to build his company, but the thought of anyone disrespecting Sarah made him want to walk away from it all. At exactly 2 o'clock, Margaret Whitman entered his office. She was an elegant woman who commanded respect through sheer presence, but Richard had never liked her coldness or her obsession with appearances. "Richard," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk, "we need to discuss your recent choices. If you're referring to my engagement to Sarah, I'm happy to discuss it." "Engagement?" Margaret's perfectly styled eyebrows rose. "I was hoping the rumors were exaggerated." "The rumors are probably worse than the truth. Sarah is an incredible woman who I'm lucky to be marrying. Richard, I've known you since you were a young man just starting out. You've always been smart, focused, ambitious. I can't understand what's happened to you. What's happened to me is that I fell in love. With your cleaning lady. With a woman who manages my household staff, who raised 2 brilliant daughters as a single mother, who survived losing everything and built a new life through hard work and determination." Margaret leaned forward. "Let me be blunt. The board is concerned about your judgment. Dating employees is problematic enough, but marrying someone so far beneath your social and economic status raises serious questions about your leadership." "Beneath my status?" Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. "You know what I mean. She doesn't have education, connections, or experience in our world. She'll be a liability at corporate events, unable to hold conversations with clients' wives, unfamiliar with social expectations. She has a college degree from Columbia University. She grew up on the Upper East Side. She probably has better social connections than most of our board members." Margaret looked surprised. "I wasn't aware. Because you didn't bother to find out who she really is before judging her. You saw a single mother working cleaning jobs and assumed she was ignorant and unsuitable. Even so, Richard, perception matters. People will think she's a gold digger who trapped you with her children. Then people are idiots and I don't care what they think." Margaret's expression hardened. "You should care. Because the board is prepared to call for a vote of no confidence if you proceed with this marriage." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. A vote of no confidence could remove him as CEO of his own company. "You can't be serious. We've built this company together, Richard. I won't let you destroy it for an infatuation with an inappropriate woman. Sarah is the best thing that ever happened to me. She's a distraction that's affecting your judgment." Look at yourself, you're leaving work early, missing important meetings, turning down social invitations that could benefit the company. You're prioritizing this woman and her children over your responsibilities. I'm prioritizing my family over corporate politics. She's not your family yet. And if you're smart, she never will be. Richard stood up, his hands clenched into fists. Get out of my office. Richard, think carefully about what you're choosing. You've worked your entire adult life to build this company. Are you really willing to throw it all away for a woman you've known for 6 months? I'm willing to throw it all away for the woman I love and the family I want to build with her. Then you're a fool. Margaret stood and walked to the door. The board meets next Friday. I suggest you come to your senses before then. After she left, Richard slumped in his chair, staring out the window at the city skyline he'd conquered. Everything he'd worked for was being threatened, and he had to make an impossible choice: his career or his heart. That evening, he drove home to the cottage feeling like he was carrying the weight of the world. Sarah took one look at his face and sent the girls to their rooms to do homework. What happened? She asked, pulling him down onto the couch beside her. Richard told her everything: the rumors, the board meeting, Margaret's ultimatum. With each word, he watched Sarah's face grow paler. They think I'm a gold digger, she said quietly when he finished. They don't know you. Once they meet you, once they see how incredible you are. Richard. Sarah turned to face him fully. Maybe they're right. What? Maybe I'm wrong for you. Maybe you are sacrificing too much. Don't say that. Don't even think it. You've built an empire. You've achieved everything you dreamed of. I can't be the reason you lose it all. Sarah, without you and the girls, none of it means anything. It means your life's work. It means your legacy. It means financial security for our future together. We don't need their money. I have enough saved to take care of us forever. But do you have enough to be happy watching everything you built fall apart? Do you have enough to avoid resenting me someday for costing you your company? Richard pulled her into his arms, feeling her tremble against him. I could never resent you. I love you. I love you too. That's why I can't let you destroy your life for me. You're not destroying my life, you're saving it. Sarah was quiet for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. What if we waited? What if we postponed the wedding until after you resolve things with the board? Sarah, no. Just until you find a way to make them understand, or until you decide what's really most important to you. I already know what's most important to me. You are. The girls are. Our family is. Then prove it, Sarah said, looking into his eyes. Choose us, knowing what it might cost. Choose us anyway. Richard held her close, knowing that the biggest test of his life was just beginning. The week leading up to the board meeting was the longest of Richard's life. He spent his days trying to figure out a way to save both his company and his relationship, and his nights lying awake wondering if he was making the right choice. Sarah had grown quiet and distant, despite his attempts to reassure her. She went through the motions of their daily routine, but he could see the worry in her eyes and the way she sometimes caught herself staring at him like she was trying to memorize his face. Mama's sad, Lily observed on Wednesday morning as Richard helped her with her math homework. Why do you think she's sad? She gets the same look she had when we were living in the old apartment and she was scared about money. Like she's trying to protect us from something bad. Rose looked up from her reading. Are you and Mama having problems? Richard's heart ached. We're working through some grown-up stuff, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, I'll always love you and your sister, and I'll always be here for you. But you might not marry Mama? I want to marry your Mama more than anything in the world. Sometimes, though, life gets complicated. Because you're rich and we used to be poor? Rose asked with the directness that always surprised him. Because some people think that matters more than it does. It doesn't matter to us, Lily said firmly. We love you because you're nice and you make good pancakes and you listen to our stories. And I love you because you're smart and funny and kind, not because of how much money your daddy has. If only his board of directors could see the world through children's eyes. On Thursday night, Richard made his decision. He found Sarah in the cottage's small kitchen, cleaning dishes that were already clean, a nervous habit he'd noticed she had when she was upset. Sarah, we need to talk. She turned to face him, dish towel in her hands. I know. I've been thinking too. I'm not giving you up, Richard said before she could speak. I don't care what the board says or does. I don't care if I lose the company. I'm marrying you and we're going to be a family. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Richard, you don't understand what you're giving up. I understand exactly what I'm giving up: a cold, empty life focused on nothing but money and power. What I'm gaining is worth so much more. What if you regret it? What if in 5 years you look at me and wish you'd made a different choice? Richard crossed the kitchen and took her hands, still damp from washing dishes. Sarah, 5 years from now I'll be watching Rose graduate from high school and helping Lily prepare for art college. I'll be coming home to a family that loves me for who I am, not what I've accomplished. I'll have built something more valuable than any company, a life filled with love and laughter and the kind of happiness I never knew existed. But your life's work. My life's work is just beginning. It's not about building a business empire, it's about building a family, raising children who know they're loved, and spending every day with the woman who makes me want to be a better man. Sarah leaned into him and he felt some of the tension leave her body. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. The next morning, Richard dressed carefully for what might be his last board meeting as CEO. He kissed Sarah goodbye, hugged the girls, and drove into the city feeling strangely calm. The boardroom was tense when he arrived. Margaret Whitman sat at the far end of the long conference table, flanked by the other directors. Richard took his usual seat and waited. Richard, Margaret began, have you reconsidered your position regarding your personal situation? I have, Richard replied calmly. I've decided that if this board can't accept the woman I love as part of my life, then this isn't the company I want to lead. Murmurs rippled around the table. Margaret's face remained impassive. So you're choosing this woman over the company you built? I'm choosing love over fear, Richard said firmly. I'm choosing a life that matters over a life that just makes money. Richard, Tom spoke up from across the table, maybe we can find a compromise. What if you kept your relationship private? What if you didn't marry her but continued your arrangement? My arrangement? Richard's voice was deadly quiet. You mean what if I continued to use Sarah for my personal pleasure without giving her the respect and commitment she deserves? That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly the kind of thinking that proves this board doesn't understand the first thing about character or integrity. Margaret leaned forward. Richard, be practical. You can have your relationship without the public commitment of marriage. Many successful men maintain private arrangements. Stop. Richard stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm going to say this once and then I'm done with this conversation. Sarah Chin is the most remarkable woman I've ever met. She's brilliant, compassionate, strong, and beautiful. She's raised 2 incredible daughters while overcoming obstacles that would have broken most people. She's not an arrangement or a mistress or a guilty pleasure. She's the woman I love, and in 2 weeks she's going to be my wife. The room fell silent. Richard looked around the table at faces that had once seemed important to him, and now just seemed small and petty. Furthermore, he continued, any company that would ask me to choose between professional success and personal happiness is not a company I want to be associated with. So here's what's going to happen. I'm resigning as CEO effective immediately. The board members began talking at once, but Richard held up his hand for silence. I'm also selling my controlling interest in the company. Margaret, since you seem so concerned about leadership, perhaps you'd like to buy me out. I'm sure you'll run things exactly the way you think they should be run. Richard, don't be hasty, Margaret said, but he could see calculation in her eyes. She'd wanted control of the company for years. I'm not being hasty. I'm being free. Richard gathered his papers and briefcase. My attorney will be in touch about the sale terms. Good luck with the company. As he walked toward the door, Tom called after him. Richard, think about what you're doing. You're walking away from everything you've worked for. Richard paused and turned back. No, Tom. I'm walking toward everything I've always wanted but was too afraid to reach for. He left the boardroom without looking back. The drive home felt like the longest and shortest of his life. By the time he pulled up to the cottage, word had already spread. His phone had been buzzing with calls from reporters, investors, and business contacts, but he'd ignored them all. Sarah met him at the door, her face pale with worry. The news is saying you resigned from your company. I did. Richard, no. You can't have done that for me. I didn't do it for you, Richard said, pulling her into his arms. I did it for us. For our family. For the life I want to build with you. But your company, your life's work? My life's work is loving you and raising our daughters together. Everything else is just details. The twins appeared in the doorway, having overheard from their homework table. Does this mean you're not rich anymore? Lily asked with concern. I'm still rich, sweetheart. Just not quite as rich as I was this morning. But you're still going to marry Mama? Rose wanted to know. If she'll still have me after I quit my job, Richard said, looking at Sarah. Sarah's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. I'll have you if you were broke and living in a cardboard box. Well, it won't come to that. I made some good investments over the years. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked quietly. Are you sure you won't regret it? Richard looked around the small cottage that had become more of a home to him than his mansion ever was. He saw Rose's library books scattered on the coffee table, Lily's latest art project drying on the kitchen counter, and Sarah's reading glasses folded on top of a household management binder. He heard the sounds of a real family, normal, messy, loving life. Sarah, 6 months ago I had everything I thought I wanted and nothing that actually mattered. Today I have everything that actually matters. How could I regret that? Because you worked so hard for that company. I worked hard for financial security and I have that. I worked hard for success and I have that too, just not the kind I expected. I worked hard to prove I was worth something and it turns out I am worth something, but not because of money or power. I'm worth something because a beautiful, incredible woman loves me and 2 amazing little girls want me to be their dad. Sarah threw her arms around his neck. I love you so much. I love you too. All of you. Group hug. Lily announced, and suddenly Richard found himself surrounded by his entire family, holding them close and feeling richer than he'd ever felt in his life. That evening, as they sat together planning their wedding, Richard's phone rang. It was Margaret Whitman. Richard, I've been thinking about our conversation today. And? The board has reconsidered. We'd like you to come back as CEO. You can marry whomever you want, we won't interfere in your personal life. Richard looked at Sarah, who was helping Rose with a school project while Lily colored at the kitchen table. This was his life now, homework help and art projects and bedtime stories. This was what success really looked like. Thank you for the offer, Margaret, but I'm not interested. I found something better than being CEO. What could be better than running a billion-dollar corporation? Being a husband and father, Richard said and hung up the phone. 2 hours later, as he tucked the girls into their beds in the cottage they'd soon be leaving for the mansion, Rose looked up at him with serious eyes. Dad? She said, trying out the word. Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you picked us. I'm glad you picked me too, Richard replied, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. 6 months later, Richard stood in the garden of his estate, watching workers put the finishing touches on the wedding setup. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced an arch covered in Sarah's favorite flowers. The mansion behind them had been transformed into a warm, welcoming family home, with children's laughter echoing from the rooms where Rose and Lily now lived. Getting nervous? Tom asked, appearing at Richard's side. Despite their disagreement over the board situation, their friendship had survived, and Tom was serving as Richard's best man. Not nervous, Richard replied, adjusting his tie. Excited. I owe you an apology, Tom said quietly. About what happened with the board. I was wrong to think you were making a mistake. What changed your mind? Tom smiled. Meeting your family. Sarah is incredible and those girls, they adore you. I can see why you chose them over the company. I didn't choose them over the company, Richard corrected. I chose love over fear. Best decision I ever made. The truth was, life after leaving his CEO position had been even better than Richard had imagined. He'd started a consulting firm that allowed him to work from home most days, giving him time to be present for school plays and soccer games and art shows. His investments had continued to grow, ensuring his family's financial security for generations. But most importantly, he woke up every morning excited about the day ahead. Places everyone, called Helen, who had volunteered to coordinate the wedding along with her cooking duties. Richard took his position at the altar, looking out at the small gathering of guests. Mrs. Rodriguez sat in the front row, having traveled from the city for the occasion. Several of Richard's old friends were there, along with Sarah's former co-workers who had become true friends over the years. But the most important guests were already part of the ceremony. Rose and Lily stood beside the altar as flower girls, wearing matching lavender dresses and identical excited smiles. The music began and Richard's breath caught as Sarah appeared at the end of the garden path. She wore a simple white dress that made her look like an angel, her dark hair flowing over her shoulders. But it was her expression that made Richard's heart race, pure joy, love, and the confidence of a woman who knew she was exactly where she belonged. As she walked toward him, Richard thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that night 6 months ago when he'd found 2 little girls scrubbing his office floor, to this perfect day when they were becoming a legal family. Every challenge, every difficult decision, every moment of doubt had led them here. Hi, Sarah whispered when she reached him, her eyes sparkling with tears of happiness. Hi, he whispered back, taking her hands in his. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, promises that spoke of love, commitment, and the family they were creating together. "Sarah," Richard said when his turn came, "6 months ago I thought I had everything I wanted. I thought success meant having the most money, the biggest company, the most power. Then I met you and realized I'd been measuring all the wrong things. You taught me that real success is measured in bedtime stories and breakfast conversations, in art projects on the refrigerator and library books scattered on coffee tables. You taught me that love isn't something you fit into your schedule, it's something you build your schedule around." Sarah wiped away tears as he continued. "I promise to love you not just in the good times, but especially in the difficult times. I promise to be the father Rose and Lily deserve, and the husband you've always dreamed of. I promise to choose our family every day in every decision for the rest of my life." When Sarah spoke her vows, her voice was strong and clear. "Richard, when we first met, I was afraid to trust my heart. I'd been hurt before by someone who made promises he couldn't keep. But you showed me that real love isn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. Real love is about showing up every day, about choosing each other again and again, about building something beautiful together even when it's hard." She paused, looking at Rose and Lily before continuing. "You didn't just fall in love with me, you fell in love with my daughters and they fell in love with you. You became our family not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That's the kind of love worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth believing in." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Richard kissed Sarah with all the love and gratitude in his heart. The small crowd erupted in cheers, but the loudest voices belonged to Rose and Lily, who were jumping up and down with excitement. "We're a real family now," Lily announced to anyone who would listen. "We always were," Rose corrected with the wisdom of her 9 years. "Now it's just official." The reception was held on the mansion's terrace, with dancing under string lights and dinner prepared by Helen with help from Mrs. Rodriguez. Richard found himself constantly amazed by the joy on everyone's faces, especially Sarah's and the girls. "Dad," Rose said, tugging on his sleeve as he danced with Sarah, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. Are you happy? Like really, really happy?" Richard looked around at the scene, Sarah laughing as she danced with Lily, Mrs. Rodriguez teaching some of the guests a traditional dance, Tom and Helen discussing recipes by the dessert table. This was his life now. This chaos, this love, this beautiful, imperfect, wonderful family. "Rose," he said, pulling her into the dance, "I'm happier than I ever imagined possible." Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the girls had finally fallen asleep in their rooms in the mansion, Richard and Sarah stood on their bedroom balcony looking out over the estate that was now truly their family home. "Any regrets?" Sarah asked, leaning against his chest. "Only one," Richard replied. Sarah pulled back to look at him with concern. "What?" "I regret that it took me so long to find you." Sarah smiled and kissed him softly. "We found each other at exactly the right time. Any earlier and we might not have been ready. Any later and we might have given up on love altogether. Do you think we'll be happy? Really happy for the long term?" "I think we'll be real," Sarah said thoughtfully. "We'll have good days and difficult days, easy times and challenging times. But we'll face all of it together as a family. That's better than happy, that's lasting." As they prepared for bed in the room they would now share every night, Richard reflected on how completely his life had changed. He'd given up a billion-dollar company and gained something infinitely more valuable. He'd traded corporate power for the power to make his family feel loved and secure. He'd exchanged board meetings and business deals for school concerts and family dinners. "Richard," Sarah said as they turned off the lights. Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For seeing us. For choosing love when it would have been easier to choose success. Sarah, you are my success. You and the girls are the greatest achievement of my life." The next morning, Richard woke up to the sound of voices in the hallway outside their bedroom. "Should we wake them up? Mama said to let them sleep late because it's their first day being married. But I made them a picture of our family. You can give it to them at breakfast." Richard smiled, recognizing Rose's responsible voice and Lily's excited one. This was his life now: children outside his bedroom door, family breakfast to look forward to, art projects waiting to be admired. "Good morning, Mrs. Williams," he whispered to Sarah, who was just starting to stir. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," she replied with a sleepy smile. They'd decided she would take his last name, wanting the whole family to share it. "Ready for our first day as an officially married family?" "Ready for our first day of forever," Sarah corrected. As they got dressed and prepared to join their daughters for breakfast, Richard thought about the conversation he'd had with Margaret Whitman just a few days earlier. She'd called to tell him that his former company was struggling without his leadership, and to ask if he'd consider coming back. "I'm building something better than a company now," he'd told her. "I'm building a legacy that actually matters." What's that supposed to mean? It means in 50 years, no one will remember or care about our quarterly profits. But in 50 years, Rose and Lily will still remember that they had a father who loved them unconditionally, who showed up for every important moment in their lives, who taught them that family comes first. That's the kind of legacy I want to leave. Now, as he heard his daughters giggling in the kitchen and smelled Sarah's coffee brewing, Richard knew he'd made the right choice. He'd found his real treasure, not gold or jewels or stock options, but the simple, profound wealth of being truly loved and having a family to love in return. "Come on, Dad." Lily's voice called from downstairs. "Breakfast is ready." "Coming, sweetheart." Richard called back, taking Sarah's hand as they headed downstairs to begin their first official day as the Williams family. As they walked into the kitchen where Rose and Lily were setting the table with careful precision, where sunlight streamed through windows that now framed a home filled with love and laughter, Richard realized that some stories don't end with happily ever after. The best stories end with happily ever beginning. Dear wonderful readers, thank you so much for taking this journey with Richard, Sarah, Rose, and Lily. Their story reminds us that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love we share and the families we build. I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in Richard and Sarah's love story? Did you see yourself in any of the characters? Have you ever had to choose between success and love? What do you think makes a family truly rich? Also, if you were in Richard's position, do you think you would have made the same choice? Was he right to give up his company for love, or should he have found a way to keep both? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one and your insights always inspire me. With love and gratitude, your storyteller Redheart.